This morning, I woke up feeling just blank, just empty, and not really having a whole lot of direction to go about my day. So I felt a strong urge to read the Bible, and I've been studying Genesis in a personal effort to read through the Bible within the next year. And I love the stories of Genesis, and they're so captivating. And even though they were so long ago, it's amazing at how many of the stories about families and how they began and the issues and problems that they have, how those stories actually relate to where we are today in life. And so where I am right now is Genesis chapter 42, with the story of Joseph. And very quickly, I'd like to share with those of you who don't know the story of Joseph. Joseph was one of many children. And I can't go back and relate how many, but if you read in chapter 41, it'll share with you all of Joseph's brothers. Anyway, Joseph was one of the younger brothers in his family, and he would have dreams about how his brothers would bow down to him one day, which obviously made those brothers not like him very much. And so through his brothers' kind of jealousy and hatred of him, they devised a plan to actually kill him, but they ended up selling him into slavery, and he ended up in prison for several years for doing nothing. And so Joseph was let out of jail because he allowed God to use him. I mean, he could have been there for the rest of his life and actually died in prison, but because he gave God glory for everything that he brought into his heart while sitting in prison, the Lord knew that Joseph was someone that he could use to further his message to anyone around him. And Joseph didn't, instead of many of us, we probably would be frustrated and angry and resentful, but Joseph actually used his time in prison to still speak to people, those other prisoners, about God. I don't know how many of us would be willing to do that in today's time, but in short, Joseph was blessed mightily as a result of allowing God to use him. And so this personally is my desire. I want to be used by God. And although I am not perfect, and although I have my own struggles like Joseph did, my heart is in a place where I want God to use me, which is why I'm doing this video, something that I have been against for a long time, but the time has come for me to do what God has told me to do. So I wanted to share this story with you all today. And so how did Joseph get out of prison? Well, I'm glad you asked. Joseph was interpreting dreams, not in a satanic way like magicians and horoscope tellers would do, but when someone had a dream and they would share it with him, he would interpret it and say, God, this is what God has given to me. So he would give God credit for what was the interpretation of that dream. So Pharaoh, who was the ruler of Egypt, the land of Egypt, had a dream. He dreamt about 7 cows that were very full and fat, and they were just walking by the bankside. And then in that same dream, 7 cows who were very ugly and scrawny had come about. And those 7 scrawny cows actually swallowed up the 4 cows. And so then he had another dream about he had another dream about 7 heads of grain on a stalk. And then in that same stalk, there were 7 heads of very wilted looking great heads of grains, and those wilted skinny heads of grain actually swallowed up the full heads of grain. And so he woke up suddenly, and he called on magicians, and he called on horoscope tellers and star readers in order to tell him, what does this dream mean? And none of them had any answers for him. But one of the prisoners remembered Joseph in prison years back. And he remembered that Joseph had interpreted the dream. And his dream for that prisoner was that Pharaoh he would go back to work for Pharaoh as his cupbearer, and that, his life would continue on prosperously. And it did happen. So Joseph was summoned out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And so Pharaoh shared the same dream I just shared with you. He shared this with Joseph, and Joseph said, I am not capable of interpreting your dream, but my God, who gives me power, has shared with me to tell you this. And he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, which was that the land was going to go through 7 years of great prosperity and great growth and food, and that there would be plenty of everything for them to have. But after the 7 years of fat and plenty, there would be 7 years of famine, and 7 years of lack. And so Joseph's advice to Pharaoh was for him to use the 7 years of prosperity very wisely, and to prepare for the 7 years of famine. And in reading the Bible, and I'll stop right here, but in reading forward, that's exactly what happened in Egypt. And so the whole purpose of this is to show how we, like Joseph, can be used by God. If it is your desire, if you are a Christian or someone who knows God, but your life has just been kind of empty, like mine was feeling this morning, I want to encourage you to say a prayer and ask God to use you like an empty flask, and to fill you with what it is He wants you to do in this life, because that is where your blessings will come from. Have a great day, everyone.